country's worst rail disaster, there's concern that the lessons haven't been learnt. 151 died when their train plunged into the Whangaihu River on Christmas Eve 1953. Today, as crowds gathered at the site to remember, some were calling for more to be done to ensure another laha from Mount Ruapehu doesn't bring disaster.
Sharp, Donald, Stead, Daphne.
Families of rescuers and victims read the names of all 151 who died as wreaths were laid at the memorial bearing the number plate of the ill-fated locomotive KA 949. Today, the Governor-General passed on a personal message from the Queen.
I know that there will be many at the ceremony whose lives were changed forever by the events of that night. My thoughts and prayers are with all of you.
Tangiwai was caused by a laha, a huge torrent of mud and rubble swept from Mount Ruapehu's Crater Lake and down the Whangaihu River, sweeping away the rail bridge. A Taihape postal clerk tried to stop the train by waving a torch, but the brakes came on too late. All 5 second-class carriages plunged into the river below, the front first-class carriage teetering on the precipice and finally toppling in too. 50 years on, Mount Ruapehu, shrouded in cloud and way beyond the Tangiwai Bridge there, threatens a repeat of 1953, and that's brought forth calls to remove a huge deposit of rubble sitting on the edge of the Crater Lake. It's been caused by the eruption of 1996 and is blocking an escape route for rising water from the Crater Lake. Jim Mason and friends monitored the lake after eruptions in the 40s, saw it rise ½ an inch a day after volcanic rubble blocked its outlet.
We couldn't induce anyone to take any interest. That's why I'm so sympathetic to people who lost their loved ones in the disaster, because we feel that we could have prevented it if someone had only listened to us. Or perhaps if we'd been more forceful. And our great concern is that it's happening again, and no one is doing anything to prevent it happening.
National MP Nick Smith says the government should send in excavators.
It is just political correctness gone mad that this government is not doing that because of concerns over iwi sensitivities and issues of using earth-moving machinery in a national park.
The Conservation Minister is happy, however, with measures such as a warning system, areas to divert any lahars and bridge strengthening following independent international advice. John Stewart, One News.
Many of the relatives, friends and survivors who gathered today followed the very same route as those whose names are now etched on a memorial. Early this morning they boarded a steam train that chugged out of Palmerston North.
The memories and fears of 50 years ago resurfacing today, but words of reassurance for the trip.
We pray that your memorial service will be one of joy today.
Steam locomotive KA 949 and 6 carriages plunged into the Whangaihu River that day. DELIA HOLMAN and her husband were in the last carriage to topple into the torrent.
I'm not at all sure how I'm going to feel. Seeing the engine for the first time was a bit sort of, you know.
Her husband has since died, but DELIA remembers the night he rescued her.
It broke a window and my husband got a man through, and then he pushed me through and gave me a torch, and I just sat up on the carriage with a torch.
For rescuers TREVOR WILDBORE and Alan Stewart, emotions are running high.
Just think it was almost a train of this size. And by 10:20 tonight, over half it's gone, and over half the people have gone as well.
A brief water stop at Martin, the fire brigade pumping 3,000 gallons into the steam engine. Ken Osborne of Fielding lost his sister Margaret. She was just 18.
She got on the train in Martin and she was going to be with her mother in Auckland to see the Queen come in. And she never got there, of course.
But for Police Minister George Hawkins' wife, there was a narrow escape. Jan Hawkins, her mother and 2 sisters were booked on the Christmas Eve train, but they changed the booking the day before.
We would have been in the carriages that went over.
As the steam engine crossed the Tangiwai Bridge, a moment of silence, just like it was 50 years ago.
Numb. No panic, nobody screamed or yelled. It was just a shock, I think.
A shock which is still being felt just as strongly today. John Newton, One News.
Now to a